Hi guys, it's Kathy. I hope you're doing well. This is the last part of July 7th's preliminary hearing. So we just have July 8th to go, and that's 4 videos. So we'll see. We'll either do 1 or 2 today. If we do 2, we're going to do part 1 of the last day of the preliminary hearing. There we go.
And lastly, sir, showing you people's 22, if I may. Do you recognize the items shown in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
And what are they?
They appear to be the item number 9, the right glove, and item number 57.
Guys, you need to shake it up. Men, you need to shake it up. You have to go hard at shaking it up. Look at him. Look at this man in this picture. What decade is this? You can't tell, can you? Because they still look the same. You look at any of the ladies in the audience and you can guess sort of what decade we're in. You guys need to, I don't know, go drastic. Get big hair or something. Do something.
Or item number 37 in this case.
The left glove?
Yes.
And what position are they shown in that photograph?
They appear to be the palm up sides.
And item number 9, is that the item you collected from 360 Rockingham on June 13th?
Yes, it is.
And item number 37, is that the item you collected from 875 South Bundy on June 13th?
Fozzie,
Yes,
this
it
is
is.
the palm. Oh, wait, you know. Never mind.
Mr. Ullman.
Mr. Fung, how many criminalists are employed by the Los Angeles Police Department?
I believe there are approximately 50.
But you were the only criminalist directly responsible for the collection of evidentiary items at both locations in this case, that is at Rockingham and at Bundy, is that correct?
I was in charge of both scenes as far as the evidence was concerned. Yes.
Were there any other criminalists other than the person you were training accompanying you?
For a short time, one of the assistant lab directors was at the scene.
And who was that?
That was Chief Forensic Chemist Stephen Johnson.
And which scene was Mr. Johnson in?
Mr. Johnson was at first the Rockingham scene and then at the Bundy scene.
Did he collect any of the evidence at either of those scenes?
No, he did not.
His purpose was just to observe?
Yes.
Are you able to tell whether a substance is blood just by looking at it?
Not 100%. I had a lot of experience searching for blood and collecting blood, so I've got a good idea of when blood is present, but I'm not infallible.
Well, do you base that impression on the color?
That is one of the factors, yes.
What are the other factors?
The color's a factor, texture, the solubility of the blood or stain at that point. There are other things, but that's mainly what I go by.
Well, solubility isn't something you observe by sight, is it?
No, it is not.
You ascertain solubility by the testing that you perform.
Yes.
And do you use the same standard presumptive test whenever you do testing at the scene?
There are other presumptive tests available to me and other criminalists, but that is the phenolphthalein and hydrogen peroxide test is the one we usually use.
All right. And is that the test you used for all of the testing you did at these two locations on June 13th?
Yes.
Could you describe how that test is done?
First of all, a cotton swab is wet with distilled water. It is applied to the suspected stain, and some of the stain should transfer onto that cotton swab. If that occurs, then phenolphthalein is applied to the swab, and through my experience, I have noticed a slight greenish tinge appear at that point. After that occurs, then I will put hydrogen peroxide on it, and at that point, an immediate pink color could show up if it is positive.
Is that referred to then as a two-stage phenolphthalein test?
Yes, it is.
All right. You do not perform on a routine basis then the three-stage phenolphthalein test?
I don't know what that is. I don't know what the method is.
All right. Now, the test that you're describing, you mentioned, is not specific for blood. That is, other substances will also give a positive reaction. Is that correct?
Yes.
And these substances include a number of vegetable substances. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
For example, onions.
I'm not familiar with all the plant-like materials that will give a false positive, but I know that some do.
Well, is there any category of vegetable substances that you're aware of that give positive substances or positive reactions?
I've just read in the literature, things that pop out in my mind right now are cabbage, apple, I believe apricot, but I'm not.
Garlic?
I'd have to look it up in the literature.
Beetroot?
I don't remember.
Cucumber?
It may be,
Dude, he said he
Horseradish?
does not remember.
possibly.
Lettuce?
I'd have to refer to the literature.
Potato?
I'd have to refer to the literature.
And of course, the presumptive test that you've described does not tell us whether blood is human blood, does it?
That is correct.
That is a determination that can only be done in the laboratory?
Yes.
So of course, you didn't tell anyone that any of the testing you had done at either of these locations on June 13th established that any of these stains were human blood, did you?
I did not state that.
That would mean then, of course, that we could not exclude the possibility of blood having come from an animal such as a dog based on the test that you did.
That is possible.
Now, you identified,
Experts are only experts because they know where to look something up.
a blood stain on the photograph marked as Exhibit 5F, which was numbered with a tag that indicates number 8. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could you point to where the blood
Where to look things up that's not Google.
stain is on that photograph? All right, so you're pointing to the little round mark in the center of the picture.
Yes.
There appears to be another reddish mark above that. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that a blood stain?
No, that is a drop of water.
A drop of water?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, looking at a blood stain, you of course don't know the age of a particular stain. You don't know how long it has been there. Is that correct?
In general terms, you can tell if a stain is fresh or it's been subjected to weathering. So you can tell if it's an old stain or a fresh stain.
All right, what would you define as a fresh stain?
A fresh stain would have a reddish appearance to it, and an older stain would be brown and or to dark, very dark.
How quickly does a fresh stain become more brown in appearance?
That depends on several factors. The more it is subjected to sunlight or heat, the faster it will turn that darker color.
I see.
Yes.
So once the sun comes out and things start warming up, it becomes important for you to collect your samples as quickly as possible, doesn't it?
That's correct.
Yes. I don't know the day of the event. The preliminary hearing was in 1994 in July. The trial didn't start until 1995 in January. I know they said the date of the event. We'll have to listen to see if they say it again, just to know when.
You were unable to ascertain, in fact, whether a particular set of stains were all contemporaneous, that is, were all dropped at the same time, aren't you?
They appeared to be relatively fresh stains. They did not have the darker.
I'm not speaking of any particular stains at this point. Are you able to tell just by looking at stains whether they were all placed or dropped at the same time?
Generally, no.
Now, let's refer first to the investigation you did at the Rockingham address. I believe the location of item number 9, the glove that you recovered at Rockingham,
Yes.
that was particularly called to your attention by Detective Van Adder?
Yes.
And what did he ask you to particularly look for in your process of recovering that?
Wow, this was pretty quick then.
At one point, he asked me to see if there was any blood on the glove.
Anything else?
He asked me to measure it and preserve the evidence also.
Anything else?
That's all I can remember.
All right. Now, to ascertain whether there was blood on the glove, you did a presumptive test.
Yes.
You applied a cotton swatch to the glove,
No, a cotton swab,
cotton
like a
swab.
Q-tip. type thing.
All right. What portion of the glove did you apply that swab to?
I believe whatever area was facing upwards, I looked for a darker area than appeared on the rest of the glove, and applied the wet swab to that portion and performed the rest of the test.
Do you recall where that portion was?
No, I don't.
Was the glove lying palm up or back up?
I'd have to refer to the photographs.
All right, let's do that.
No, this was the 90s. He's just resting his eyes.
With the 4 up.
I'm sorry, is that 4? My note was that 4 had been withdrawn.
I believe that's 9.
This is number 9?
9.
Okay.
Excuse me. I'm sorry, I have 2 numbers on it. The grand jury exhibit is 4, this is exhibit 9.
Okay.
Have you located where you applied the swab to the glove?
I don't recall where exactly I applied the swab to the glove.
Right. Does the photo in Exhibit 9D depict the position of the glove as you found it?
From the best of my recollection, yes.
Now, you mentioned that one reason you don't routinely do presumptive tests on all of the evidence that you encounter is because the manipulation of the evidence may lose valuable trace evidence, I believe you said.
Yes.
Right. But you did manipulate the glove in order to do a presumptive test, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Now, were you, or did you attempt to locate any stains or footprints in the location leading up to that glove?
I looked for them, however, I did not find any.
Did you examine carefully for any disturbance in the pattern of debris leading up to the glove?
I did not notice any discernible pattern of that I could differentiate from randomness.
Well, would that assist you in ascertaining whether someone had dropped the glove there or whether they had thrown the glove there from some other location?
I don't really understand the question.
Would any disturbance in the debris pattern assist you in determining whether the glove had been dropped there or thrown there?
In certain circumstances, it might.
So it would become important then to preserve the pattern of the debris leading up to the glove, wouldn't it?
Well, objection as an incomplete hypothetical. It assumes that no other disturbance has occurred between the occurrence of dropping the glove and this witness arriving at the scene.
Overruled. You can answer that if you're able to.
Could you repeat the question?
Wouldn't it be important to preserve whatever patterns there might be in the debris leading up to the glove in order to ascertain whether it had been dropped or tossed?
If that was a major factor in the case, it might be, yes.
And of course, the more people traipsing back to look at the glove, the more disturbance there would be in the debris pattern, wouldn't there?
Yes.
Well, objection, that assumes there's such a thing as a debris pattern, assumes that's not in evidence.
Overruled.
Now, the pattern that you referred to in the pavement proceeded in the direction of the entrance to the house?
The pattern in the pavement,
Are you referring to the
Yes.
blood droplets on the
drops.
driveway?
The drops that you examined in the driveway at Rockingham.
yes.
They did not proceed to the glove.
No.
Now, you mentioned that you remained at the Rockingham premises until 10 a.m.?
Yes.
So you were there approximately 3 hours?
Just about, yes.
And you didn't arrive then at the 875 South Bundy premises until 10:15 in the morning?
Yes.
And that was the first time anyone began collecting any evidence or swatches of blood at the premises at 875 South Bundy.
To my knowledge, yes.
Hi,
Now,
Tina.
Your property report simply indicates the time that you arrive at the premises. Is that correct?
Yes,
It does not indicate the time you recovered any particular item at the premises.
that's correct.
So your property report for the morning of June 13th at the Rockingham location just indicated 7:10 in the morning,
That's when I arrived at the scene, yes.
all right? How long after you arrived did you take swatches of the drops that appeared to be blood in the driveway?
That occurred around 9 to 9:30 in the morning.
Did the collection of this evidence follow the chronology of the numbers that you assigned to each item?
Could you repeat the question?
Did your collection of these items correspond to the chronology of the numbers you assigned? For example, you would have collected item number 1 first and item number 7 after item number 6?
I believe so.
So you assign these numbers chronologically as you collect each item?
No, I will assign numbers to the items I'm going to collect, measure them off, and then after measuring and documenting with photography is done, then I will go ahead and start collecting.
So the last step in your process is to actually collect the samples after you've identified all of the numbers that you plan to assign.
Generally speaking, yes. That's not a hard and fast rule, though.
Now, you said when you arrived, or after you arrived at the Bundy premises, you saw the bodies being removed. Is that correct?
Yes.
What time were the bodies removed?
Approximately 10:30, around then.
15 minutes after you arrived?
That's a rough approximation.
Now, when you collect the samples on the damp swatches
Yes,
of the drops that you suspect may be blood,
yes.
do you take more than one swatch of each?
If the sample is large enough, I'll try to collect a large sample, which may be more than one or up to, or just maybe a thread if it's not very much. It depends on the size of the sample.
So if you have a larger sample, will you get 2 or 3 swatches of the same sample?
Usually, yes.
Did you measure the distance between the drops that you located on the pavement leading to the rear of the premises?
I measured the drops that I collected, yes.
All right, so referring then to what have been numbered.
Jen, thank you so much for the super chat through PayPal. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
112, 113, 114.
PayPal is nice because they don't take 50% of it like YouTube does.
And 115 on exhibit. Number 19. You could tell us the distance between each of those stains.
Yes.
Could you tell us how far apart they were?
I can give you the measurements that I have taken. I'm not really great with math, so I don't want to do a subtraction right now.
Okay.
Photo ID 112, which is item 47, was collected approximately 44 feet west of the west curb of Bundy and 10 inches north of the north wall of the condo or apartment or whatever it is. Photo ID 113, which is item number 48, was recovered 56 feet west of the west curb of Bundy and 3 feet north of the north curb. Which probably means wall or the side of the house.
Do you have curb in your notes?
Yes, I did.
All right.
Photo ID 114 was located 86 feet west of the west curb of Bundy and 1 foot 10 inches north of the north wall. And photo ID 115, which is item number 50, was recovered 38 feet 8 inches east of the west edge of the rear driveway and 1 foot 10 inches north of the north wall of the building.
Right, now you're using 2 different reference points. Numbers 112, 113, and 114 were measured for their distance from Bundy,
Yes.
and number 115 was measured for its distance from the rear driveway.
Yes, it was.
All right, how far apart were 114 and 115?
We've gone back with the forensic draftsman, and that's all measured off now, but I don't have that in my notes.
Now, in the photos that appear in the exhibit, there appears to be a variation in the color of the spots or drops that are numbered on that exhibit.
There's a slight variation, yes.
Where do you see the variation?
In photograph E, with the marker 114, it appears slightly different color from 115 in the photograph.
Would that suggest to you the possibility of a different age of that particular mark?
I would tend to put that more on an effect of photography than I would an actual difference in color.
Well, isn't the purpose of the photography to uniformly record the appearance of the evidence that you encounter at the scene?
Theoretically, yes, but in practice, color is variable from photograph to photograph.
Well, aren't the photographers instructed to photograph each item of evidence from the same angle
Generally, yes.
and using the same lighting conditions for each item of evidence?
Generally, yes.
Now, with respect to the vial of blood labeled O.J. Simpson that you submitted to the criminologist in serology,
The criminalist,
criminalist,
yes.
I'm sorry. Who was the criminalist to whom you submitted that?
I believe I gave it to Colin Yamauchi.
Now, is this the same Colin Yamauchi who gave you the blood samples from the victims?
Yes.
Why would you be giving him samples when he's giving you samples of others?
On June 13th, I received a vial of blood with O.J. Simpson's name on it from Detective Van Adder. And on June 15th, just 2 days later, Detective Van Adder gave Colin the two samples of blood from the coroner's office, and in turn, Colin then gave me the samples to book.
Okay, but Colin did not give you the sample of Mr. Simpson's blood back, is that correct?
He gave me back the sample from Mr. Simpson's blood on the same day that I gave it to him, which was on June 14th, 1994.
What was your purpose in giving it to him then, if he immediately gave it back to you?
He took an aliquot from that sample and then gave me the remaining portion of the vial.
He took a what?
Small sample.
What's the
Aliquot.
word that you referred to? Aliquot?
Yes.
Do you want to spell that for us?
Aliquot, I believe is the spelling.
And Did you record then the amount of blood in the vial when you gave it to Mr. Yamuchi and the amount when you got it back?
No, I did not.
So you don't know how much you took?
No, I don't.
And you don't know how much was in the vial whenever you turned it over to someone else?
It appeared to be pretty much full.
And who did you turn it over to
At what point?
after you got it from Mr. Yamuchi?
Once I had labeled it and assigned it a item number, I then booked it into our property division, our SID property.
What does SID stand for?
Scientific Investigation Division.
And is that sample then kept under refrigeration?
Yes, it is.
Were all of the samples you collected kept under refrigeration?
I did
booked
not.
them to be refrigerated, yes.
All of the swatches that you had collected?
Swatches I booked to be frozen.
Thank you. If I could have just a moment.
Yes.
Now, do you maintain some sort of inventory of all of the items that you collected?
Yes, and I prepare a property report for that purpose.
And is the property report then the last control you have over the exhibits?
Once I book them into property, then my portion of the chain of custody ends there until I may be asked to go back and analyze something, then it starts up again.
And have you been asked to go back and analyze some of the items that you collected?
No real scientific analysis, I've been asked to go back and describe some of the evidence a little bit better for the detectives, and that's about it.
Have you encountered any situations where any of the evidence you recovered was missing?
I don't recall anything at this point in time, no.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Ms. Clark, anything further?
Sir, the bloodstains at the Rockingham address, do they all appear to you to be fairly fresh,
They appeared to be, yes.
similar in color?
Roughly, yes.
And the stains at the Bundy address, do they all appear to be fairly fresh
Yes,
and similar in color?
yes.
I have nothing further.
Mr. Ullman, anything else? Thank you, Mr. Fung. You're free to go. Do not discuss your testimony with any other witness.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
People call Greg Matheson.
Face the clerk, please, and raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Gregory Matheson, Gregory Matheson.
Ms. Clark?
Thank you, Anna. Mr. Matheson, tell us what you do for a living.
I'm a supervising criminalist employed by the City of Los Angeles, working for the Los Angeles Police Department Crime Lab.
Did you receive some education as your part of your background to achieve that employment?
Yes, I did.
What is it?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in criminalistics from California State University at Long Beach.
Can you define criminalistics for us?
Well, criminalistics is a science that is involved with the collection, preservation, and analysis of physical evidence. We employ a lot of different natural sciences towards that end.
And as a student, sir, did you begin to learn the field of criminalistics by working in some fashion?
Yes, I did.
What was that?
Well, initially, prior to working for the Los Angeles Police Department as a criminalist, I was a student worker, a community service officer for the Culver City Police Department. In that capacity, I learned how the department operates. I had a chance to learn something about field investigations, fingerprinting, crime scene photography.
Now, did you indicate how long you've been a criminalist with the Los Angeles Police Department for?
No, not yet. I have been a criminalist with the City of Los Angeles for just over 16 years.
And of those 16 years, how much of them was spent doing latent prints or serology or other?
Well, as a criminalist, I never have done any sort of latent print work. I started initially, about my first 18 months, I was assigned to the toxicology unit of the crime lab. I was then moved to an area called special testing. I was in that for a little over 18 months. And then I was assigned to the serology unit. I've been in the serology unit in one capacity or another for the last 13 years.
What is a serology unit? What does it do?
Well, the serology portion or unit of the criminalistics laboratory is involved in the identification and analysis of body fluids. Our interest is first identifying whether or not a particular fluid or stain is a fluid of interest, and then once that's identified, to be able to determine the genetic markers or the makeup of that stain or fluid in an attempt to compare it back to a possible source of origin.
Now, is your current position one of a supervisory nature, or is it one of the rank and file, if you will?
Well, currently, and for the last 5 years, I've been supervisor of the serology unit.
Have you ever supervised any unit other than the serology unit?
Yes. The first 4 years as supervisor was strictly of the serology unit, but starting last, I believe it was last July or August, I also was placed over direct supervisory control of our trace comparative unit, our field unit, the forensic photographer, and our chemical processing unit.
What's a field unit?
We have a couple of criminalists assigned to what we call the field unit. These are criminalists that are responsible for handling responses to daytime field calls. They're also, at that time, either working in another unit or also training in another discipline.
Now, have you taken any courses with respect to your position with LAPD as a criminalist?
Well, specifically, as far as an academic course, I attended a 2-week class that was offered by the FBI in their academy in Quantico, Virginia, and it was titled Biochemical Analysis of Blood Stains. It was offered at the academy, but through the University of Virginia.
And was there any training that you received while on the job when you began with LAPD from other criminalists?
Yes, throughout my career, you receive on-the-job training from other criminalists. Upon entering a new unit, even though you have the basic scientific background to understand the concepts and things that are being presented, you always have to learn from the criminalists that have been in the unit for a while exactly the procedures and specific techniques that are utilized by that unit. So yes, the first several years was involved in picking up these techniques from the criminals that had been performing them for quite a while.
Now, have you received any kind of certifications or become a member of any professional organizations?
Yes, I'm a member of 2 professional organizations and hold 2 voluntary professional certificates.
The professional certificates are what?
Well, one of them was initially offered by the California Association of Criminalists, and it was a certificate of professional competency in criminalistics, or a general background certificate on the whole field of criminalistics. Approximately, I believe it was about a year and a half ago or so, the program was turned over to the American Board of Criminalistics, which rather than being a state-based body, is a national body organization whose sole purpose is the certification of criminalists throughout the country.
And do you have some position with respect to the American Board of Criminalists now?
Well, I received what's called diplomate status of that organization, or general knowledge of criminalistics.
And the California Association of Criminalists, is that a professional organization?
Yes, it is. It's what's called a regional association of forensic scientists that is, even though it's based in California and the majority of the members are in California, we have quite a few in other states and in a few other countries.
And how long have you been a member?
I believe I joined in 1979.
Do they have certain standards for certification in that organization?
The standards to become certified, yes, you need to be in the field for 2 years, plus pass a written examination.
Did you have something to do with developing those standards for certification, sir?
Yes.
What did you have to do with them?
Well, in January of 1987, I was placed by the association as the chair of what was called the Certification Committee, and it was that committee that established the program that eventually became the CAC's certification program. As committee chair, I was involved in establishing the minimum standards, figuring out the processes that would be used in handling the whole certification sequence, along with working with the criminalists that were assigned making up the general test.
Have you held any executive type positions in any of the other organizations, such as the American Board of Criminalists?
Yes, the American Board of Criminalistics, when it was formed, because of my association with the California Association of Criminalists, I was asked to be part of the original formation of the ABC, or the American Board of Criminalistics, and I held the position of vice president of that organization.
Are you familiar with an organization named the California Association of Crime Lab Directors?
Yes, I am.
Are you a member of that?
Yes.
For about how long?
It's been not quite 5 years, I believe.
And with respect to the California Association of Criminalists, have you held any executive positions in that organization?
Yes, I have.
What have you held?
Well, up until May of 1994, the previous 4 years, I held board of director positions. The first year, I was what was called the regional director south, or the regional director for the southern part of the state. Then I was elected to president-elect position, served 1 year as that, 1 year as president, and the last year was board position of immediate past president. As of May, I was off the board of directors.
You do any teaching, sir?
Occasionally, yes.
And what kind of teaching do you do?
Well, mainly it's within the department. I teach serology and basic field techniques at the homicide detective school, the sexual assault detective school, and more recently the detective supervisor's school. I also was able to be involved in, I believe it was in 1987, 4 training sessions that were offered throughout the state by the Office of Criminal Justice Planning on the new protocol that was established for collecting sexual assault evidence.
At the current time, you are a supervising criminalist?
Yes, that's correct.
What are your duties, sir?
Well, I have direct supervisory control of, I believe it's 19 employees at this time, and in that role have basic administrative control or responsibility over the units that I mentioned earlier, assigning days off, handling sick reports, all the sort of administrative things that go along with that. In addition to those duties, I still am involved in some of the day-to-day operation of the technical aspects of the serology unit, which is more my specialty than the other ones. A regular duty of that position is I read all the reports that are created by the criminalists within that unit, do both a technical review of the report and check for just some misspellings, wordings, and that sort of thing. Towards that end, I examine the report, pull all the notes associated with the report, make sure that the data that is presented in the report fits the raw data that was obtained during the course of the analysis, and then make sure that the data that is included in the report is consistent with the conclusions, that the conclusions can be supported by that data.
So you're still involved in the technical aspect of things, the
Thank
actual
you, Mel. Thank
work
you.
that's done in the serology unit.
That's correct, not to the same extent that I used to.
You're not
but
late, you're
towards that
fine.
end, I also am involved with occasionally confirming electrophoresis results, which is one of the techniques that's used in the laboratory.
And that is one of your functions as a supervisor, is occasionally to be called upon to confirm results.
That's correct.
And in that regard, sir, in serology, is it one of the functions to detect genetic markers such as ABO and proteins and enzymes?
Yes, it is.
Can you tell us what is meant by that, ABO, enzymes, proteins?
Well, within, probably for simplicity, we'll just talk about blood stains. There are other body fluids that the unit deals with. But in somebody's blood, there are what are called genetic markers. These are factors that exist in the blood that are acquired genetically from your parents and exist in certain discrete types. Probably the best example that can be given of that is something that most people are aware of, and that's the ABO blood typing system. That's one of the genetic markers that we look at. You are either a type A, a type B, a type AB, or a type O, and that is determined by the types that your parents have. In addition to the ABO system, there are also other genetic markers that are enzymes or proteins that are found in the blood system, and they also exist in discrete types, just like I described in the ABO system. An example being one that goes by the name of esterase D, or ESD. You're either type 1, type 2-1, or type 2. These types, through a variety of techniques, are identifiable in a blood stain. Once a stain is categorized, then we analyze a liquid sample from a known source to see if there's similarities between, if they have the same types. If they have the same types, they could have the same source. If there's a difference in the types that are found, then that person is eliminated. It's a source of the blood stain.
And that's very typically what you do in that serology unit, forensically speaking, is that you determine whether an item of evidence, say a blood stain found at a crime scene, could have come from a particular person by comparing the types found in the blood stain to the type of blood withdrawn from the person.
Well, that's the main thrust of the unit, is to perform these analyses, not only to try and include somebody, but also to exclude somebody. If the types differ, then they are excluded as being a source
Rude.
of
We're
blood
all
stain.
inclusive. We're all guilty. We're all on the stand.
Now,
We all
you
did
referred
it.
earlier to the method known as electrophoresis,
Yes.
and can you describe very briefly for us what that is?
Electrophoresis is a technique that's utilized to determine the types of the enzymes or proteins that I mentioned earlier. It's not used in the ABO system, but in these enzymes. Simply put, a protein or an enzyme, depending on the structure of it, will have a slightly different charge to it. So the technique involves pouring a plate that's maybe 8 inches square, something like that, with agarose, which is kind of a jello type material. The samples then are placed on threads and established in a certain location on the gel. Current is allowed to run through it, and the enzymes or the proteins that are located in that sample then are spread out throughout this gel. When that's done, certain identification chemicals, visualization chemicals, are placed on top of it that react with the individual enzymes and allow us to see where they travel to. In essence, we get a band that appears in the gel at a certain spot. We always run controls on those, say of a known type, which tells us where a band is supposed to show up for a particular type. If a unknown sample matches the location of those bands of a known sample, we then can assign that type to the unknown sample.
So you first take a known sample and see how it runs on the gel, and see where it marks?
Well, it's not done consecutively, it's done at the same time. A typical gel will have, say, 12 different samples on it, and out of those 12, you may have 4 known or standard samples on it, and the remaining 8 or 9 spots are taken up with unknown samples. They're all run together so you can do a direct comparison of the locations of the bands to each other.
Now, with the with the enzyme and protein testing, in addition to the ABO testing, are you able to give smaller numbers in terms of the number of people that could possibly have been the origin of a bloodstain, for example?
That's correct. Part of the comparison involves trying to add some significance to the information that we receive. Example being, going back to the ABO blood system, if we determine that a stain is ABO type O, that exists in about 48, we can say 50% or half of the population. If we just had that one test, all that would do would be to eliminate half of the population and include the other half as a possible source of that blood. At that point, we would run some of these enzymes, and with each additional marker or with each type that we determine, the potential population of people that could have left that stain gets smaller and smaller. If we have a blood stain that's a type O, which is 50% of the population, and identify another factor that is also 50% of the population, the combination of those two means now you're down to 25%, or you've cut the number in half. With each additional test, that number or possibility gets smaller and smaller.
Now, in this particular case, sir, did you supervise and assist in the testing of some blood stains and blood samples?
I supervised and assisted in part of it, and I directly ran the tests in part of it.
In your experience, sir, is all evidence received by a lab for analysis bear a DR number?
Yes, it does.
And does each case have its own discrete DR number in order to keep all of the evidence organized in one place?
That's correct.
In this case, is this case been assigned DR number 9408174131?
Yes, it has.
And on June the 24th, were you asked to do serological testing on item numbers 17, 59, 60, and 49?
On the June 24th was the date the request was made. I was not around when that request was made. I actually didn't find out about it till the next day, and then didn't start the testing until the 27th.
Okay. Now, item number 17, is that described as the whole blood of the defendant, or Mr. Orenthal Simpson?
Yes, it is.
And number 59, is that described as the whole blood of Nicole Brown Simpson?
Yes, it is.
And number 60, is that described as the whole blood of Ronald Goldman?
Yes, it is.
And number 49, is that described as the blood recovered from the crime scene as photo ID number 114?
That's correct.
And showing you, sir, People's 19, photograph E, do you see the number 114 in that photograph?
Yes, I do.
And does that correspond then to the photo number of the item number 49 that you tested in this case?
That's correct.
What test did you perform with respect to item number 49 first?
With respect to that item, I ran a presumptive test for the presence of blood to determine whether or not the stain was in fact blood. Then I ran a test to determine whether or not it was human in origin. The additional test run at that point was the ABO test that I've previously described, and then 2 enzyme tests, one of them that goes by the designation of group 1, which includes 3 enzymes, and then an additional test that goes by the designation of PGM subtype.
So you subjected that to ABO testing as well as electrophoresis?
That's correct.
Now, with respect to...
Excuse me, Ms. Clark, I think I'm going to interrupt at this particular point in time. It's just about 4:30, and so we will continue with this tomorrow. Mr. Matheson, please come back tomorrow. Do not discuss your testimony with anyone except the lawyers involved in this matter.
I'm going to keep going for one more because courts are not open yet. Session. Honorable Kathleen, can I acknowledge or declare?
Good morning. We're once again on the record in the case of People versus Simpson. The defendant is present with counsel. The people are represented. Mr. Matheson, if you retake the stand, I remind you that you remain under oath. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Matheson.
Good morning.
I think where we left off yesterday, you indicated that you tested item number 49, which was the blood drop from the trail left at 875 South Bundy, shown in close-up in photograph E. E, and shown in perspective in photograph D. Do you recall saying that?
That's correct.
And you tested that initially to determine if it was of human origin?
Yes.
And with respect to the blood samples that were retrieved from the defendant and from Ronald Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson, with respect to those samples, did you test them also?
Yes, I did.
What tests did you perform on those?
On those, I performed the ABO blood typing test, the Group 1 enzyme electrophoresis test, and the PGM subtype electrophoresis test.
And did you also subject the blood drop from the trail, item number 49, to those same tests?
Yes, I did.
Did you prepare a chart, sir, indicating what you found?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have a chart I previously shown to the defendant as would be marked table 24.
All right.
Showing you people's 24, sir. Do you recognize what I'm showing you?
Yes, I do.
What does that chart show us?
Well, just a summary of the results of the analytical tests that were performed on those items.
With respect to the ADO typing performed on each of the blood samples, with respect to the blood from Nicole Simpson Brown, item number 59, the ABO typing result was?
That I determined that she was a type A.
And as to Ronald Goldman, item number 60?
In that case, I determined that the results indicate that he's a type O,
And as to the defendant, item number 17?
that he is a type A,
And as to item number 49, the blood drop?
that the tests indicate that it is of a type A.
Now, what do you mean when you said indicates?
Well, during the course of ABO typing, there's actually two different constituents that are present in the blood that can determine what the ABO type is. One of them is called antigen, and the other is called an antibody. If we only determine one of those two, we call it indicative of. If we're able to determine the presence of both the antigen and the antibody, and they confirm the type, then we just call it a type A, or a type O, or a type AB, or type B, depending on whatever it turns out to be.
Does that mean when you say indicative of O that it might not be O?
No, it just means that I was only able to, either only one of the tests worked, or I only ran one of the tests. I just was not able to confirm the results with the other one.
Have you performed ABO testing before, sir?
Yes, I have.
About how many times?
Well, I didn't break it. There's a variety of different type of ABO tests. I didn't break it down to the individual ones, but in my career so far, I've run an ABO typing test a little over 6,500 times.
In those 6,500 times, have you had the experience of doing the initial run for ABO typing and come up with an indication of a type, as you've indicated here, like indicative of A or indicative of O, and then had an opportunity to run the second test on the antibodies to confirm that result later?
Yes.
In any of those cases, did it turn out that the initial indicative of type, whether it be O, A, or A, B, or B, turned out to be wrong?
I don't know if I would say turned out to be wrong. Occasionally there are discrepancies that occur between the two, and then we come up with what's called an inconclusive result. Normally, you can, through further testing, try and decide or determine why it may not have come out as clearly as you expected, but occasionally it does happen where your first indication, your first test is not how it's eventually reported.
And how often does that happen?
I don't have a number. It happens fairly rarely.
Now, in this case, after the ABO typing, did you perform further typing?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
Well, there was additional test run that I mentioned before, the enzyme group 1 test, which includes actually 3 different enzymes in one process. One of them is the ESD or esterase D that's indicated on the chart. Another is PGM or phosphoglucomutase, and the third is GLO or glyoxylase. Those 3 enzymes are all run in one process.
With respect to the Nicole Simpson Brown sample, item number 59, what was the ESD result?
A type 1.
With respect to Ronald Goldman, item number 60, what was the result?
Also a type 1.
And with respect to the defendant, item number 17?
Also was determined to be a type 1.
And with respect to item number 49, the blood drop?
That was also determined to be a type 1.
Thus far, with respect to the markers that you found in item number 49, excuse me, item number 49, would it be a fair statement that only Ronald Goldman could be excluded from having been the source of that blood drop?
If our only population are the 3 people that are being described here, yes, he's the only one of those 3 that can currently be excluded as being the source of that blood drop.
Then you performed the PGM subtype test,
Yes.
and the result with respect to Nicole Simpson Brown in item number 59,
I determined that she was a PGM subtype 1+,
and Ronald Goldman, item number 60,
that he was a 2+, 1+,
and the defendant, item number 17.
was determined to be a 2+, 2-.
So each of the 3 parties there are a different PGM subtype, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
With respect to item number 49, the drop of blood on the trail at 875 South Bundy, what was the PGM subtype?
The PGM subtype on that sample was determined to be a 2+, 2-.
Based on the 3 people that you see on that chart, could Nicole Simpson Brown have left the blood drop at 875 South Bundy, marked item number 49?
No, with the inclusion of the PGM subtype information, she's excluded as being a source of that sample.
With respect to Ronald Goldman, based on the PGM subtype, could he have been a source of that blood drop on the trail known as item number 49 at 875 South Bundy?
No, he could not.
With respect to the defendant, could he have been the source of the blood drop that was found on the trail at 875 South Bundy, known as item number 49?
Yes, he can be included in the group of possibles.
Now, did you make some effort to determine what the frequency or number of percentage of the population that could have left the blood sample that you typed out in item number 49 as indicative of A, ESD type 1, PGM subtype 2+, 2-? What percentage of the population could have left that blood drop?
Okay, I determined that that combination of those 3 type genetic markers exists in approximately 0.43% of the general population.
Well, Your Honor, we'll object to the admission of this evidence for lack of foundation. If the prosecution is going to offer a computation based on the multiplication of the frequency of 3 different types or enzymes in the blood, we're going to have to show that these are independent random variables that can be multiplied, and there's been no foundation for the independence of each of these calculations.
Well, there's been no foundation as to how this particular number has been arrived at, so maybe you want to go into that.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Tell us how you arrived at that frequency, sir.
Well, within our laboratory, since actually the beginning of the serology unit, we have kept information on all the whole bloods that have been run by that unit, all the genetic marker types that have been determined on all the victims, suspects, witnesses, whatever blood sample happened to come into the laboratory. And through doing that and identifying the different types, we've been able to establish percentages of the population that have a particular type. For example, in the ABO blood typing system, we've determined that approximately 34% of the population is a type A, approximately 16% is a type B, approximately 4% is a type AB, and approximately 46% is a type O.
And how are those tables compiled, if you know?
The tables or the information is just an ongoing process. I've, for the last approximately 10 years or so, have on a annual or semi-annual basis added up all the types that we've determined during that previous time period, added it to the quantity that we had before, and performed the calculations.
And approximately how many times have you performed such calculations, sir?
Like I said, I do it approximately annually, anywhere from 9 to 18 months, and I would say maybe 9 or 10 times we've brought it up to date.
And on how many occasions have the people in your lab testified to frequencies of types that are found in evidence stains and in various persons in courts of law?
Well, I'm not sure I can give a specific number on it. I know that I have testified personally in blood-stain type cases approximately 115 times. Out of that, frequencies are brought up in at least half of those.
And in each case, was the frequency based on the tables you've mentioned using the multiplication system admitted in the court?
Yes, it has.
Is the system of multiplying each of the factors to achieve a frequency, an overall frequency, a method that is accepted in the scientific community, sir?
Yes, it is.
And then you reported that the frequency you found to be for the typing that you found in the blood drop on the trail at 875 South Bundy was 0.43%?
Approximately that, yes.
Your Honor, if we could hear the witness.
All right.
Mr. Matheson, how many PGM subtype tests has your laboratory performed?
Well, I have specific figures on the number that I have run. I determined that I've done approximately 1,000 items by the PGM subtype method. The only information I can supply you as far as overall laboratory is since we started computerizing our statistics, which was the first part of 1990, and since then the laboratory as a whole has done a little over 1,800 items by that method.
Computerizing statistics? Wow.
Indicated that you've done about 6,500 ABO typing tests,
Yes, that's correct.
but you've done less than 1,000 PGM subtype tests.
No, slightly over 1,000, that's correct.
All right. So you do a PGM subtype in about 1 out of 6 of the tests where you do an ABO type.
That's approximately how the math works out.
How do you select which cases you're going to do a PGM subtype?
Well, it depends an awful lot on how much sample there is to begin with. Our protocol has tended to be to do the ABO first and then go on to the electrophoresis systems. I've mentioned earlier this group 1 system, which includes PGM as one of the enzymes in it, that you normally try and run first and determine what the PGM type is, not the subtype. And if you don't get a PGM type, then there's no reason to expend further sample running the subtype system on it. So many times we don't run it.
Would you say then that there's some sort of random selection of the PGM subtypes from the larger group of ABO types that you do?
You mean as far as the ones that appear in our frequency charts or in the ones that are run?
What I'm saying is that the individual cases where you have determined to run a PGM subtype are not a random sample of the ABO type test that you've done.
I am not totally sure what you mean by random. I do know that, we follow certain criteria as to whether we run a particular test, and it depends on the quality of the sample. The data that appears in our frequency charts is based strictly on whole blood samples, not evidence stains. And we will not run a particular marker in a whole blood sample if we don't have something to compare it to in the stain. So, I'm not sure if that's random or not, but sometimes we run it, sometimes we don't.
And the frequency chart that you maintain for PGM subtype, that's just based on the PGM subtype test that you have done in your laboratory.
That's correct.
And you compute that by race of the subject that you're testing?
No, the statistics that we keep within our laboratory, the general population statistics that I've used to calculate this, do not take race into account.
So you have no race-specific frequency data for PGM subtype?
No, that's not true. The chart that I used in this case and that we use regularly on all of our analyzed evidence reports does not break it down by race. However, we do maintain reference books in the laboratory that does if it's needed.
And these reference books would refer to frequency data collected in other laboratories?
That's correct.
But you just used your own data?
Yes, we always do.
And your data is race-specific for neither the ABO nor the PGM subtype?
No, we don't determine race on any of our frequency determinations that we have. We don't feel it's our job to determine what race left a stain. We just have a stain of an unknown origin, so we choose to report a general population statistic.
But yet you're aware that there are dramatic differences in the frequency of blood type, for example, among blacks or African Americans as compared to whites.
Whether it's dramatic or not depends on the particular marker. I do have data here on the racial breakdown on the three genetic markers that I did run in this case that information was needed.
Well, are you aware, for example, that other data suggests that type B is twice as frequent among the black population as it is among the white population?
Well, I don't know specifically what it is. I'd be happy to look it up and confirm it, but I'll accept the fact that there can be major differences, particularly in the ABO system. In the PGM subtype system, it doesn't vary quite as much as that.
Welcome
You're
back.
not aware that there have been reports in PGM subtypes of ratios as great as 3 to 1 between races?
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me that if in specific populations it can vary by that much. That's one reason why up to this point I've specifically mentioned that these frequency determinations were approximations.
And what you've done in order to come up with this 0.43% or 1 in 200 is simply take your calculations of the frequency of each of the markers and then multiply them together to come up with 1 in 200.
With the 0.43, that's correct. And then I kind of rounded up for ease of understanding to approximately 1 in 200.
What is the frequency of type A that you use to multiply?
For the data that I have there, I use 33.7%.
And for the PGM subtype 2 plus 2 minus?
1.6%.
And you simply multiply those together to get the 0.43%.
Well, also included in there is the esterase type 1, which I use 79.6%.
Now, you have made no effort to correlate the frequency of PGM subtype with the frequency of a particular result in the ABO test, have you?
Oh, you mean to see if there's any sort of correlation between the two?
Exactly.
No, within our laboratory, we have not done that. I have learned throughout my training and have been advised that they are independent.
Been advised by who?
I don't have any specific name or reference. It's just been something that's occurred during the course of the last 12 years of my serology training. It's my understanding that they are independent factors.
There's none of the testing that you have done or the accumulation of data that you have done attempts to correlate how frequently you would have a 2 plus 2 minus, for example, in an A blood sample as opposed to a B blood sample or an O blood sample or an AB blood sample.
No, within our laboratory, we have never done those calculations.
Your Honor, we would renew our objection based on People versus Collins, that the multiplication of these factors is improper unless they can lay a foundation to show the independent appearance of each of these factors that they're multiplying.
Ms. Clark?
Yes, Your Honor, counsel's raising the possibility of linkage, and I think that with maybe a little bit further questioning, I can establish that is not an issue in these particular markers. That's more an issue in other areas, if I may.
All right.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the term linkage, sir?
Yes, I am.
Are you familiar with any studies that discuss the possibility of linkage in the systems that you've tested for the purposes of your testimony today?
In this particular case, dealing with these factors that have been around for and used for many, many years, I right here cannot specifically come up with any studies. It just is something that has existed for quite a while.
In the scientific community, has there been any concern voiced that with respect to the ESD or PGM subtype testing? I'm sorry. Where'd you leave off? Has there been any agreement concerning the existence or non-existence of linkage with respect to the ABO, ESD, and PGM subtype categories?
My understanding is there's general agreement that there is no linkage between any of these factors.
So that, as of this date, the scientific community agrees that there is not the problem of linkage that might otherwise skew the frequencies that are reported in all these cases where these particular markers are tested and found in blood types and in blood stains for the purpose of determining frequency.
That's correct. These sort of determinations have been being made and used in court for in excess of a decade.
Does the court wish me to further inquire?
No, the objection, the defense objection at this time is overruled.
Now, you indicated, sir, that you do not, the table that you like to use does not break down by race.
That's correct.
Is that a more conservative approach than focusing first on the race of a suspect and then extrapolating out from that to see what tables would be fit based on
The characterization is conservative.
Sustained as to what that means, I think it's vague.
Oh. Why don't you like to consider race when you determine the frequencies and choose your tables?
There's actually a couple of reasons. I believe I mentioned one earlier in that as a criminalist, as a scientist, I receive a piece of evidence that is, say in this particular case, a blood stain that was left on at a crime scene. I have no knowledge of who potentially might have left that behind. I don't want to assume that it is a Caucasian or it is a black or it's Hispanic or something along that line. So I prefer to use our general frequency considerations that we do because it gives kind of a middle number where all the different races are considered within the population of the city of Los Angeles. Like I mentioned earlier, I do have statistics broken down as to how it might be given a Caucasian, black, or Hispanic. But I don't prefer to use those just for the reasons that I mentioned. Also, I feel it's important for us to have our own data that we can support, that we know where the information came from, and it's not always possible for us to receive information as to the race of an individual whose blood that we're typing. And even if we did have a process of receiving it, there's some question as to the validity of how that's determined. Does the person that's drawing the blood just look at them and make their own determination or what? So we prefer to go with the general characteristic.
If, for example, sir, you were to consider, first of all, well, the suspect is white. Therefore, I'm going to look at the tables for white people concerning the frequency of each marker that you're testing. Does that basically begin by narrowing the focus, by making the assumption that your evidence stain will be from a white person?
That's correct.
And in that regard, sir, then might that distort the frequency to make it unfairly more incriminating than you otherwise might have if you did not make any assumptions about the possible source of a blood stain?
Well, depending on how it happens to work out for that race, it could be either more or less incriminating.
But either way, it might distort your result if you were to narrow the focus by making an assumption that the person who left a stain is of the same race as the suspect.
That's correct.
And you did not do that in this case.
Not for purposes of the report or the chart.
Now, I take it, sir, then, that you found, as you reported, that the types detected in the blood drop of item 49 left on the trail at 875 South Bundy occurs in 0.43% of the population?
Approximately 0.43, that's correct.
And who, among the three that you have listed in the chart marked Peoples 24, could possibly have been the source of that stain?
Of the three people that are described both in my report and on the report, only Mr. Simpson can be included in that percentage of the population that could have left that stain.
So Mr. Simpson alone is included in the 0.43% of the population that could have left the blood drop on the trail at 875 South Bundy?
Of the three people that are mentioned on the chart, that's correct.
Then by my math, we may, if my math is any good, we may fairly say that 99.57% of the population is excluded as a possible source of the blood drop found on the trail at 875 South Bundy, marked as item number 49.
That's correct.
Mr. Ullman.
Let's see what he has to say to that.
Ms. Matheson, the frequency tables that you rely on, you indicate, are based on the tests that are done in your own laboratory.
That's correct.
And you accumulate this data over a long period of time.
Yes.
Now, as a police laboratory, the tests that you conduct ordinarily are people who have been arrested as criminal suspects or the victims of criminal activity.
That's true.
That's not a random sample that is representative of the population as a whole, is it?
No, it is not. It's, like you mentioned, victims and suspects in the city of Los Angeles.
And in fact, ethnic or racial minorities would be substantially overrepresented in that group, wouldn't they?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
But like I mentioned, we do not get racial information on most of the, or all of the samples that we receive, but logic tells me, yes, it's probably the case.
Well, for example, would you dispute that the African-American population in California is about 7%?
That's approximately what I've heard. I don't have those statistics with me.
But yet, for arrest statistics and arrest data, they account for from 30 to 35% of arrests, don't they?
The same thing, I'd have to accept your data on that, but I believe it's in that area.
All right. So minorities are much more likely to appear in the group of persons that you are testing for blood or bodily substances than they appear in the population as a whole.
That's correct.
So the frequency data that you come up with may not be replicated if we were looking at the frequency in the population as a whole.
That's true.
Now, tell us a little bit about your laboratory. How many serologists do you have employed in your laboratory?
Well, first off, all of our professional staff are criminalists. They are not necessarily hired as serologists or toxicologists or narcotics chemists. Within the serology unit right now, I have 6 people working.
Now, do all 6 of these people work in the same laboratory?
Same physical location, yes.
In one room,
Yes,
all right? And all of your tests are performed in that one room.
yes, that's correct.
Does your laboratory follow the FBI guidelines with respect to controls for contamination?
I would have to see exactly what they are. We do have a number of controls regarding contamination in place.
All right. Controls for contamination are pretty important in a laboratory doing the sensitive kind of testing that you do, are they not?
Definitely.
And occasionally there have been problems in laboratories doing this sort of testing with respect to what are called blooms of contamination.
I'm not sure what you mean by blooms of contamination.
That's not a term you've heard before?
Not in relation to the type of testing I performed here, no.
Have you heard that with respect to DNA testing?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Well, you do DNA testing in your laboratory, don't you?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Your Honor, we would offer to show that the contamination with respect to DNA testing could affect the accuracy of results with respect to other forms of testing of blood and bodily substances as well.
Well, Mr. Ullman, there's been no evidence presented, and in fact, the prosecutor was specifically asked whether they were going to be presenting DNA evidence in this proceeding, and the answer was no, and therefore I don't think that's relevant at this time.
I'm not proposing to offer DNA testing results. What I am proposing to explore is whether there has been a problem of contamination in the laboratory in which Mr. Matheson is employed.
Your Honor, the witness has already indicated that the type of contamination that that Mr. Ullman is referring to does not occur in the testing that he has conducted in this case.
As your question relates to DNA testing contamination, the objection is sustained.
All right? Let me ask you more broadly. Have there been any problems of any sort of contamination in your laboratory?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
To my knowledge, we have not had a problem with contamination within our laboratory.
Have there been documented examples of contamination in your laboratory?
Not to my knowledge.
And do you do a regular regimen of testing to see whether you have any problems of contamination in your laboratory?
Well, every one of our tests has built-in controls that would indicate whether or not there is a contamination or any other form of quality control problem.
All right. And do you regularly do proficiency testing of your results?
Yes, we do.
And do you have an error rate compiled for your laboratory?
Of the proficiency tests, both external and internal, that we have performed, there have not been any errors.
What kind of external testing do you have of your proficiency?
We subscribe to two different services. The one that has been around the longest, that we've used the most, is from a company called CTS, or Collaborative Testing Service.
And do they use blind testing?
No, they do not.
So you have never utilized any blind testing of your proficiency by external sources?
I think I need to clarify how you're using the term blind. We receive the items. We know that they are proficiency test samples. We do not know the results prior to our completion of the test and submission to them. But we do know they are proficiency test samples.
So there is no routine process whereby you test samples without knowing that they are part of a proficiency test.
That's correct.
Now, all of the tests that you described today that you did on the 3 blood samples and the blood stain are exclusionary tests. Is that correct?
If you mean by that, yes, we attempt to exclude somebody.
None of these tests can tell you specifically that a particular blood stain was left by a particular person.
That's correct. There's nothing here that would individualize a stain to any one particular person.
So any attempt to analogize this to fingerprints or precise identification of a person would be inaccurate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, the tests that you performed produce some sort of product or result that other people can look at and interpret besides yourself?
In the case of the electrophoresis test, yes, we photographed the results.
You photograph the plate on which the test is performed?
That's correct.
And did you do that in this case?
Yes, we did.
All right. But there is nothing preserved with respect to the ABO typing?
No.
So no other person could interpret the results that you received from that?
Well, there is my raw data. In other words, the readings that I had as I was performing the test itself. Beyond that, no. All that's left is some additional sample that could be tested by somebody else if need be.
Okay. Now, normally, the ABO testing, for example, is going to be more accurate if you are testing whole blood samples, is it not?
I don't know if it'd be more accurate. Once we supply an answer, the answer, in my opinion, is accurate. The whole blood samples tend to be easier to analyze than a stain.
All right. And would that also be true with respect to the other tests that you performed here, the Group 1 and the PGM subtype?
No, not necessarily. With those tests, we take them basically to the same point where we're drawing down a part of the liquid sample to create a stain, and then we test the stain.
Is there any relationship between the age of a blood stain and how successful these tests are?
Yes, there is.
What is that relationship?
Well, as a stain gets older, the likelihood of getting conclusive results becomes less and less. The factors that we're looking at are biological in nature, and unless they are stored in a proper condition, will eventually rot and be untestable.
At what point, for example, would you be unable to successfully conduct a PGM subtype test?
Like I said, it varies depending on the conditions. I have not been able to detect PGM on a stain that was picked up out at a scene as short as a week later. In that particular case, the stain was subjected to direct sunlight on the pavement for in excess of 24 hours, I believe. And I have also, on the converse side of that, successfully gotten PGM on stains that were 5 to 6 months old, but had been collected fairly quickly and then stored frozen.
So the promptness with which the samples are collected and how they are stored can have a significant impact on these tests. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, you were not able to get conclusive results with respect to item 49 on all of the tests that you conducted, were you?
That's correct.
All right. Could you explain which of the tests you conducted gave you inconclusive results?
I'm going to refer to my report, copy of my report. Okay, in relation to item number 49, I got no activity for the GLOW test or the GLOW enzyme.
The GLOW was part of the Group 1 test that you did?
Yes, that's correct.
What would account for that you would not get any results on the GLOW on the Group 1 test?
The most likely answer is that some degradation of the sample had occurred. The GLOW or GLO enzyme degrades very rapidly, and we probably get less or fewer conclusive results from that one enzyme than from any of the others.
Does the fact that you get inconclusive results on the Group 1 test in any way raise doubts as to the results you get on the PGM subtype test?
What do you mean as far as, I'm assuming at this point you'd be talking about the PGM result that is derived during the course of the Group 1 testing. And inconclusive merely means that there's some question about that particular reading. And if it was a straight inconclusive or a no activity, then I would be concerned a little bit about the result that was obtained on the subtype test. I would like to have a confirmation. In this particular case, item number 49 exhibited a 2 plus 2 minus. I would expect the PGM to be a 2. They would correlate there.
Now, the PGM test is the same test that you rely on for the GLOW enzyme, isn't it?
Well, it's all part of the same run on the same electrophoresis plate. It's not necessarily the same test. It just so happens you can develop different portions of the same gel for different enzymes.
So what he's doing might be a little boring, but it's effective because, like, she went up and she said, so there's a 97% chance or a 99.57% chance that no one else had this blood type other than OJ, right? Well, she never got into like, well, how do you know that? He's pulling it apart, minutely, and I think he's doing a better job. I think he's putting more doubt in than her just saying, so this is it, right?
Now, you make one assumption in the test that you conduct on item 49, and that is that the substance you are testing emanated or came from one individual, don't you?
I don't assume that while doing the test, no. I run my analysis. I do assume that when I'm doing the frequency calculations, that's correct. But as far as the rest of the testing goes, it doesn't matter whether it's a mixture or not. The results are obtained and they're recorded.
Are you saying you would get the same results that you're reporting here even if the stain that was being tested was a mixture that came from two different individuals?
Well, this particular stain gave the results that were obtained. If there's more than one individual present in that, it would still give the exact same results because that's what was obtained on this sample. If you are saying that this sample was mixed with the blood of another individual that had different genetic marker types and are exhibited here, then the results would have reflected that.
Well, let me give you a hypothetical. Assume that we had a assailant with type O blood who was injured in the course of the commission of a crime. And on that assailant's hands were blood of the victim, which is type A. If those two bloods were mixed, and the drop that you are testing was some mixture of those two blood types, what result would you get for your ABO test?
As far as the example that you gave, the results would be the same here. It would be indicative of a type A.
All right, so you wouldn't know that there was a type O assailant because you're assuming that this all came from one person.
Well, back to the other question, I'm not assuming that it did come from one person. However, the results that you obtained during the testing of a blood stain in the ABO blood typing system, if it's strictly from a type A person, you could have the presence of the A antigen or a combination of A and H, which ultimately indicates a type A. A type O person has this H antigen present in their system. So if you have a mixture of blood from an A person and from an O person, you'd also see the A and H, and ultimately would be indicative of a type A.
So you get the same result.
That's correct.
So if the scenario I presented involved an assailant with type O blood and 2+2- PGM mixed with the blood of a victim who had a type A blood and a 1+ PGM subtype, would you get the same result you have here?
No, given the scenario you just described, in the PGM subtype system, I would expect to see a 1+, 2+, 2-.
All right. Now, is there any quantitative variation in that mixture in which you would not see the 1+ PGM subtype?
Sure, at some point, if the mixture of blood that was the type A PGM subtype 1+ got down low enough so that the 1+ was no longer detectable, then yeah, theoretically that could happen.
What kind of mixture would that be? 20-to-1?
I have no idea.
No idea?
No.
So if there were a possibility of mixture, that would substantially affect the calculation of frequency of occurrence that you presented here today, wouldn't it?
If it was required to calculate a frequency, then we would also have to include in that frequency the population of type O individuals.
All right, well, what difference would that make if we included both O and A in the ABO results and then multiplied it by the frequency you're
They get paid by the letter.
using for PGM subtype?
Well, if you give me a moment, I'll calculate that for you.
Thank you.
We are 3 videos away from the actual trial now. We have about 10 more minutes left. Not even in this one.
The way I figure it, rather than having a 0.43% of the population approximately, it would work out to approximately 1%.
All right, so instead of 1 in 200, it would be 1 in 100.
That's correct.
Now, when you talk about that kind of frequency in a population the size of Los Angeles, for example, where we have 8 million people, you're saying that there are something on the order of 40,000 to 80,000 other people whose blood would produce the identical genetic markers that you have identified in item 49. Is that correct?
Approximately, that's correct, yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Whew. I don't know about you guys, but that was, we made it through a big one there. That was long.
Is there anything in the stain that we have marked as item number 49 that indicates to you that it is indeed a mixture of blood from 2 people?
Well, I would not necessarily know that. Like I mentioned earlier, the results would be the same, but there's nothing specific to indicate a mixture or whether it's not a mixture.
If indeed item number 49 came from 2 individuals, then they would both have to have a PGM subtype of 2+, 2-, somewhere in there?
You'd have to have at least one of the factors. If it's, approximately equal mix, like I mentioned earlier in the example that was given, if it was a different subtype, I would expect to see that other type show up. So if we did in fact have a mixture, the additional blood would have to be either a 2+, 2-, or a 2+, or a 2-.
And in fact, at least none of the other
No.
2 victims have that.
Ron Goldman did, didn't he? Oh, I hope they show the board again. Wasn't Ron Goldman a something just 2+? Hold on, we'll find out.
That's correct.
Keep going,
And then
keep
that
going.
other person would also have to be a type 1 for ESD,
That's correct.
Oh, come
and an O or
on.
an A as to the ABO system.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm going to rewind it. Do you guys remember what Ron
Are you
Goldman
familiar with
was?
the term known as titering?
Yes.
Would you be able to, if asked, titer the stain known as item number 49 with respect to ESD or PGM subtype to determine the quantities with respect to being able to either rule out or limit the possibility of it being the blood of two different people?
I don't believe that would be appropriate testing to determine something like that. I'm not sure you could determine something like that.
Is there any testing you're aware of that could narrow down that could eliminate completely the possibility of that being two people?
Not to my knowledge, no.
But there was no independent evidence that you were able to find that determined that in fact that was indeed the blood of two people?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Holman, anything else?
No. Thank you. Mr. Matheson, if we had a mixture that included PGM subtype 2+2- plus some other subtype, at some point in terms of the ratio of the mixture, the other subtype would be masked or would not appear in your results. Isn't that correct?
Is this similar to what we were talking about before, if there was a completely foreign type besides the 2+2-?
Right.
That's correct. If you got to a point where the other blood was diluted to the point where it didn't show up, then you wouldn't see it.
But you would still see the A result on the ABO test.
He's
I
type
suppose
A.
at some point it's possible where you'd still see the A and not the subtype.
Thank you. Nothing.
All right, hold on. We are at 50 minutes, 46 seconds. I'm just going to... There. Let's just pause it here.
Population that could have left the blood.
Okay. So, this is the item A, ESD1, 2+2-. Ron Goldman was... Oh, you're right. So, A, it was Nicole. So, she's subtype 1. So, would a 2+2- hide a 1? If would that still show up as a 1 if her blood was mixed with the drop? It definitely wasn't just her blood. So I'm just looking. It looks like, right, that her blood maybe could have been in there, not probably, but maybe it's possible that her blood was in there. With that 1, I mean, this would cover it, wouldn't it? I'm not a person to ask or no. I'm just going to take it back to where we were.
Or if there was a completely foreign type besides the 2+2-.
Right.
That's correct. If you got to a point where the other blood was diluted to the point where it didn't show up, then you wouldn't see it.
But you would still see the A result on the ABO test.
I suppose at some point it's possible where you'd still see the A and not the subtype.
Thank you. Nothing. Excuse me. 1 minute. Do you make some sort of calculation of how much of the sample you are consuming in the course of the tests that you're running?
Are you asking me, can I tell you how much I used?
Yes.
Yes, I can. Refer to
wouldn't-
my analysis
They wouldn't bother with blood type at all if they had DNA.
notes.
Algebra. He did appreciate it, Kelly. He did.
I consumed a portion of one of the swatches that was available to me that was approximately 6 millimeters by 3, approximation. That left 2 swatches plus a portion of that one remaining that I worked on.
So each of these tests that you perform consumes a certain proportion of the sample that you have available to test.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. question.
All right.
With respect to the sample of the item number 17, the blood of O.J. Simpson, did you similarly inventory how much of that sample you consumed?
The proportion that would be consumed would have been a stain of consisting significantly less of than one drop out of the vial, which when I received it had about 2 milliliters of blood in it. So it would have been a insignificant.
Either at the
Donald, you say stuff like that all the time. What are you talking about? All right, guys, we made it through 2. And look, he's asleep. He's starting the day out. Hold on, I just got to see if he's really asleep.
margins or in the tissue.
All right. Thank you so much for doing another OJ. We're getting to the trial. We're so close to the trial. I shall see you guys next time. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye, guys. Thanks.